Greetings and thanks for coming, for joining us today. I'm Theo Juke. This is the Many Hats of Coco, and we're out in the field today at Potter Jesse Jones' house. We're going to interview him here and maybe see a little bit of his work and studio in his enclave. He has a couple acres out here in Pleasantville, Oregon. Jesse's an old school potter who employs a rarely used wood-fired kiln system. I'm anxious to talk to him about this and more about his art too. So Jesse, would you care to join me out here?
Thank you.
Smile for the cameras. Here we go. So I just want to get a little bit of background and how did you get started in pottery? And is this your main art? And did you try other arts? And
Yeah, so I had my first real exposure to clay in high school. It was about 1997, I guess, in Corvallis in high school. And I had to wait till my senior year to get into the ceramics program because of the way our school worked. It was very popular. And I was kind of hooked almost immediately. I started making pieces, and I was like kind of enamored with the process. Like, oh, I made a piece and I can eat off of it. And like making little ice cream bowls and stuff. And so I started there, but I just got a taste of it before I graduated. Like, it was very late in my high school career. And then when I started at OSU, I studied engineering there. I also did pottery in my free time. They had a student craft center there, and so I was able to work just as a student, go in there between classes and throw pots. And then that kind of changed over time, or I started working there. So I was both making my own work, and then I got hired to like recycle clay and fire kilns for them.
Wow.
And then I became an instructor over maybe 5 years there. And I actually was at OSU for a total of 10 years, 4 years to get my degree, and then I actually worked for the university for 6 years in the engineering department, and that whole time I was involved in the craft center. So I was there for about 10 years in lots of capacities, either a worker or an instructor. And so I was just pottery was just a really steady portion or a steady part of my life where I kept going back. Like I was there every day, basically making pots between classes. And so it's just been like that for 20 years now. I've been making pottery. I've never taken more than like a month off, I think, between doing that. So I think it is my primary artistic outlet, and it's very much something that I'm not like naturally artistic. Like if you gave me a pen and paper, I could barely draw straight lines, and I couldn't draw anything like curved or sketching. I couldn't.
That's amazing looking at your art around your house.
Yeah,
here.
and so I have like my engineering background. I'm very like rigid and sort of type A personality, so the art has had to I've come at it from this from more of like a construction methodology and like mindset. Like I'm creating and making things. I'm not a classical artist. Like I think my work is very tight and stiff, and so I'm trying to relax it and trying to like clay is a wonderful medium for that, for being able to. You can do anything with it, and so. But what I tend to make is square and sharp edges and stuff. So I'm trying to relax that, and that's a future development.
Now I might point out that these wine goblets are part of your artwork.
Yep.
So here's a question. So at OSU, I'm sure they had it was gas-fired kilns. How did you get into wood fire? And tell us a little bit about this process and how rare it is.
Yeah. So I did. At OSU was mainly gas-fired ceramics. We had electric kilns. We also had raku kilns, which are a low-temperature, fast-firing process where you get the pots red hot, and then you take them out of the kiln and when they're red hot and throw them in sawdust, and then they burn, and it's really incredible. And I did a lot of that, and it was very instant gratification. And then I was actually introduced. From a friend that I worked with at OSU at the Craft Center. He knew the people that owned this property that we're at right now. And they were the previous owners of this property were wood-fired potters. And through my friend, I found out about this place, and I started coming down here in 2005, right as I was ending my career at OSU. I started coming down here and helping on work days, like where we split wood together and started helping fire the kilns. And then the opportunity came up for my wife and I to purchase this property in 2012, and we did that. So I'd been coming here for about 7 years, and then we had the opportunity to buy it. And so I kind of sort of knew what I was getting into, and then we've been here for about 5.5 years now. And so there were here. So this is Pleasantville Pottery, and we have 2 full clay studios here. The previous owners were both potters, and they had different practices. One was an atmospheric potter, which is wood firing type of firing, and then the other, the woman was a low fire potter, where she used electric kilns to fire her work. So they had 2 separate studios, 2 separate types of clay, and needed to keep those things separate. So when we moved in, my wife is not a potter. She supports us, but is not. She actually does. She does a little bit of clay actually, but it's not a passion of hers yet. And so here at Pleasantville, we have it's a 10-acre property, and there are these 2 pottery studios, and then there were 2 wood-fired kilns that the previous owner Tom had built to make his work and fire his work. And then since we purchased the property in 2012, we have built 2 more wood-fired kilns. So now we have a total of 4 wood-fired kilns and the 2 studios. And then we also have the residency program that we can talk about in a little bit. And so...
I have a quick aside question. I didn't know this, and you have different types of clay for electric-fired kilns or wood-fired kilns.
Yeah.
And what's the difference in those clays?
It has to do with the temperature that they can withstand, basically the durability of the clay. Most clay that you'll find, especially like red brick clay that you see in red brick chimneys and on houses and things, is a relatively low temperature clay, and it's all relative. So low temperature like red brick clay and low fire clay is usually fired to about 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. High fire clay, which is what we use, can be fired up to about 2400 degrees, and there's quite a difference between those 2 temperature ranges and what happens in the clay itself. The low fire clay is it's pervious, so it's not waterproof. So that's why it's like terracotta or maiolica. They have to glaze it in order for it to be watertight. Whereas when you fire those higher temperatures, the clay vitrifies, which means that there's a chemical change that happens within the clay body, and it becomes tighter and more glass-like. So when something is vitrified, it's impervious without any glaze. It's impervious within the body. So it's very much approaching the properties of glass. And so that's what we operate on that end of the temperature spectrum. And the clay has to be durable enough to withstand that.
Yeah, it's really interesting to go over your work and realize that there's no glaze on it, and it's as smooth, and you can't see this on TV or feel it on TV, but it's a very smooth, much like a glaze, and there's no glaze involved.
Yeah, it is. There's not an applied glaze involved, but what happens, briefly with the way these kilns operate, wood is the fuel. It's the heat source, and it provides, as it burns, it kicks off both heat and ash. And ash has glass-forming minerals in it. Ash is glass-forming, or by its definition, it has glass-forming minerals in it, and those minerals they fly up off of the fire that's burning inside the kiln. So the kiln, if I can back up a little bit, the kiln's a big brick box basically it's enclosed, fire's on one side, the work is in the middle, and there's a chimney on the other side, and it's a natural draft system. So that as the fire burns and the flame and smoke go through the kiln and go up the chimney gets hotter, and then it pulls, heat rises, so it pulls harder, which means more air comes in the front of the kiln through these air ports and causes the fuel to combust, and then and so that it's sustaining and increasing the combustion, which is increasing the temperature in the kiln, so it's getting hotter as you burn more wood, but it's also kicking off all those bits of ash and molecules of ash. When the pots get hot, as the kiln temperature rises, the molecules start to fly through the kiln, and they start sticking to the pots, and they build up over many hours. Our firings range from 36 hours to 130 hours, kind of in that range there. And you can kind of imagine it like an oil painting. It's like the molecules are building up like layers, like deep layers. There's a depth of surface, and so the high temperature, long duration firings, molecules of ash are being deposited for up to 130 hours, and they build up a thickness which becomes a glaze. It bonds with the glass forming minerals, bond with the surface of the clay, and technically make a glaze. But it's just not an applied glaze like you would like a paint your own pottery place.
So as you're describing this fire going across the pottery, maybe you could take us through some of the process here.
Yep, so this is a piece of bisqueware. This was thrown on the wheel, and it's a little shallow bowl. And then after it's thrown, I trim it, I turn it upside down, and then I remove excess clay. It's kind of like spinning a piece of wood on a lathe. It spins back around on the potter's wheel, and I use these metal tools that carve out as this thing spins back around and it's a little bit drier. It carves out this extra clay and then makes the more finished form, because I can't do that when I throw it, and then it would have a solid bottom. And so trim it, and then it bisque fires, and this is like it's been fired about 1800 degrees. The next step is to get it ready for wood firing. In the kiln, this plate sits in the kiln, and it has these things called wads, and wads are sacrificial clay balls, and you have to put these on every piece in the kiln, because as the wood ash is going through the kiln, it sticks to everything. It sticks to the pots, it sticks to the shelves and the posts, everything, the big stack that's in the kiln. And so if you don't have these sacrificial clay bumpers, the ash will stick to the pot and stick to the shelf, and they'll stick each other together. So if you break it off,
let's pull this in. This might show us how exactly you're setting that up.
Yeah. So these wads can be thought of like rocks in a river, and the flame is on one side of the kiln, and it's going to the other side to go up the chimney. And so as the flame is coming across the piece, these wads are like this, and this particular piece was stacked in the kiln upside down like this with 5 more of those wads,
and that would hold the next plate on it.
Yep, and there's a little like a 1-inch gap like that, and so those things stacked up.
And so this is how it gets the effect. So the flame's coming from
that side this way,
and all of this, which looks like glaze, is actually off the wood.
Yep, that's all.
It's all a glass type of material.
Yep. It's just minerals that are in ash that form glass, and so the piece went in the kiln looking like this, and then these wads were glued to the piece like this, and then it comes out of the kiln like this. And so there's a lot that we're doing on the outside of the kiln, but we don't. There is no applied glaze on this piece, but it's chemistry between the wood ash and what's existing in the clay. Different types of clay, porcelains, stonewares, they will produce different color palettes, and so that gives us, there's a huge number of variables in the process. I can use the same clay and fire it in the same kiln, but if I fire it in a different location within the kiln, it'll look different. And that's if everything else is the same. And
let me ask you this: does a different kind of wood give a different kind of glaze?
It absolutely does. We use
so it would have a different mineral in the wood.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep, we use softwoods and hardwoods, both. We use we're here in the Willamette Valley in Oregon, and we use wood that we can readily get. We don't really want to buy wood, but there's a lot of wood around here that we can scrounge, and we work with a couple of local lumber mills and get their scrap waste. One of those mills produces fir, or uses fir to make 2x2 stakes, and we get their extra stakes. And so the Douglas fir mill is softwood and produces a certain kind of ash, and then another mill that we work with produces a lot of walnut and maple and oak. They make a lot of furniture, and so we get a lot of hardwood from them, and so then we work together, or those woods work together very nicely at different stages of the firing. We want to do different. We want to use different woods for heat gain or ash release.
So some of your work, I notice, have these beautiful blues in them. Would that be a particular type of wood?
There is applied glaze on some pieces. So, like on this plate, there's not applied glaze.
But we have one right here.
Yeah, so speaking of applied glazes, so in this particular piece, there's no glaze on the outside of this piece, no applied glaze by me. This is wood ash But on the inside, there is an applied glaze. And so it's hard for wood ash to reach inside of a piece. And so I apply the glaze inside, and then it's ready for wood firing. And the glaze is just a mixture of minerals and water, a suspension of really finely ground minerals in water, and that a lot of those minerals are the same minerals that are in wood ash. So but it's just a little bit different.
And as long as we're talking about this I can see there were 3 points where this was sitting on.
Yep. So this piece, and we can actually use this as a demo here. This piece was what this piece looked like before it went in the kiln. This is a porcelain cup, and it was fired on its side with 3 wads, the 3 clay balls, and in this situation, it had the shell marks that you can see in here are a product of the shell. It sits here, and then that sits on the wad like this, and it's balanced in the kiln like on 3 points right here, and then the fire is coming across the kiln and then out and up the chimney, and then this makes these are the flame path. So the fire was coming around the piece, and so you can think of it like a rock in a river, and there's like an eddy back here. So all the minerals are going around it, and this is the thin part, like the part where the water was quiet or no minerals came around there. So it's a record of the, in this case, 50 hours of wood, of combustion happening around this piece up to 2,400 degrees. And this is a record of that event.
Wow, that's amazing. So how rare or common is this wood firing, and how old is it? Give me a little bit of background on it.
It's a very old process. So everything was fired with wood before about 150 to 200 years ago, I'd say, when they fired everything with wood, and then they went to oil, and then eventually natural gas and electricity. And so wood firing it's making a resurgence now because there's many reasons why it's becoming a more popular method to fire. You cannot get results like this any other way. There is no other firing process that can make results that look like this. And you couldn't paint this, or maybe somebody could, but I absolutely could not make this pattern myself. It happens within the kiln.
I have a quick question. Yep. You said they fired it this way 150 years. Who is they? Where are we
all pottery around the world was fired with wood, and possibly with dung and other, but natural materials that were readily available. And it's pottery's prevalent in many cultures, if not all cultures around the world. It developed simultaneously and independently in lots of different cultures. For food storage and eating and whatnot. It was the primary, before metalworking. I mean, it was an early on process.
And how common is it today?
It's not common, but it's becoming more popular. There's a few dozen wood-fired kilns in Oregon. There's probably right now there's probably a few thousand wood-fired kilns in the world, and so it's not, and it's definitely they're becoming more and more popular. More and more are being built right now.
I understand that we have some questions from Coco. Coco, care to give us some questions here?
I do have some questions. Right. Do you know what minerals give which colors?
Generally, there's like, for instance, iron has a suite of colors that it produces, from anywhere from this light blue color that's in here to green, even to red to black. So it depends, and it depends on how it's fired and how much oxygen is present with the in the kiln atmosphere with which, or what iron will do in that situation. There's every other metal oxide produces its own suite of colors as well, and a lot of those metals are present in the wood that we burn and in the clay in trace amounts, and so that it definitely has an influence on there.
Just to follow up on that, so you're not necessarily sure what color you're going to get when you fire up.
Absolutely, yeah.
How exciting is that?
So it's incredible. So literally the piece goes in the kiln like this, and the piece comes out of the kiln like this. And we're on the outside, we're throwing wood in, but we are not we are not controlling it. So I like to say that we don't have control over the process, but we have influence over the process. So I can do things like I know that if I put this type of clay with this type of liner glaze in a certain kiln, I'm going to get this palette of color that's here, but I don't know what that palette's going to look like. And it very likely could be ugly and bad. The process is it's hard on pottery. Like there's loss in the kilns. At that high temperature, things move around. They get what they call pyroplastic, and so things happen. Pots tip over. They tip into each other. If they tip into each other, they stick, and then they fuse together, and then you have to break them to get them apart. So we have a lot of loss in the kiln, but it's very it's absolutely mind-blowing every time you open a kiln. It's like Christmas. Like you're like, wow, like when you see this piece, and then the pieces, they grow on you over time too. You notice different things. Like I've had dishes in my kitchen for years, and I pick it up, I'm like, oh wow, like, and the sun hits it a certain way. There's a lot of depth. Like I don't know if we can pick up on this, but there's crystals in the surface of this glaze, these little gray crystals on this gray background, and those crystals are formed as the piece is cooling. So after we're done firing, we've shut the kilns down and walked away, then magic's happening. Like as the kiln cools, the different minerals are like complexing together to make crystal formation, and then that's driving the different color response that comes out of these pieces. And so we have no idea what it's going to look like, just maybe a general desire or notion. The other thing that I should mention is that the kiln is basically a three-dimensional Tetris puzzle. It's a massive, the kilns that we have range from, I can pretty much get inside all of them, but they range from, say, 3 feet wide, or 3 or 4 feet wide, 3 or 4 feet tall, 3 or 4 feet deep. That's like the small size, up to their big kiln is 15 feet long, 5 feet wide, and 5 feet tall. And it's packed about 2/3 full with pottery, and it's a big three-dimensional Tetris puzzle. And so we have the pieces fit in there, and they influence each other. So if a pot is here, and another pot is here, and the flame is coming this way, it's going to go around this piece, and it's going to hit this piece at a certain way and go over and under it, and then it's going to hit the next piece and go weird through it. And so that produces all of these unique marks, and then you'll never find two pieces that look the same. They can be they can be exactly the same right next to each other, and they're going to be different because something else is influencing them. So all the pieces in the load share a relationship together. So they're
Wow. Well, I can testify to pieces growing on you, even though I'm not part of this process. I happen to have some pieces at home. My wife loves your things, and I have favorite cups.
Yeah.
The colors or whatever seem to speak to me, and they're right for my morning coffee. Coco, have you got any more questions for us?
I do. You mentioned two terms before, porcelain and bisque. Are those different or the same thing?
They're two different things. So porcelain is a type of clay. It's just a different type of clay particle. Stoneware. So porcelain is a type of clay, and stoneware is a type of clay. Bisqueware is a term that's used in the firing process of either of those clays. Bisqueware is when you fire the pottery to about 1800 degrees, and then it becomes this. It's still porous, but it can't be at temperatures lower than 1800. The clay can be turned back into clay. Like you can put it back into water, and it will melt down and turn back into usable clay.
Oh, wow.
Once it's bisqued, it can't do that. There's a chemical change that occurs at that temperature of bisquing, but it makes the piece more durable. Like you can then handle it. I can't break it very easily, and so it's useful at this stage. If it was greenware, which we call unfired clay, I could just crush it in my hand and turn it back.
Still wet, basically.
Yeah. And so.
Coco, got another question.
Well, another one just came up, and you talked about firing. What does it take to fire one of these kilns?
Yeah, so it depends on which kiln we're firing, but it can range anywhere from a 30-hour to 130-hour firing, and it's around the clock. Like you're putting wood in the kiln every 5 to 10 minutes, and so that's 24 hours a day. You need people that are awake and doing that. So normally we divide up into 6-hour shifts. We put a couple people per shift on the kiln, but and so it can take days. Like the long firing is 5 days around the clock, 24 hours a day. Wood's going in the kiln. We burn up to 10 cords of wood in that long firing. So I burn 40 to 50 cords of wood a year. So wood acquisition is a big portion of what we do. But you can't do this by yourself. I can't stay up for 5 days in a row. I can't process 50 cords of wood a year. So I have a great crew of people, of other artists in the Pacific Northwest that really want to wood fire but don't have their own kilns. And so it's a really perfect situation where, and it's very a community-based event. So I have the facilities and the kilns, and then I bring in, like we plan a firing, and then people show up with their bisqueware or their glazed bisqueware ready to load in the wood kilns. We load the wood kilns, we fire the kiln, and then we let it cool, and then we come back like 2 weeks later and we unload it, and then clean everything up. And then in our free time, we're prepping wood. We're finding wood, cutting wood, stacking wood. But it's definitely a big group.
So this is a major operation. How many times a year do you do something like this?
We fire around, right now we fire about 8 times a year. We fired more in the past. We're trying to kind of come to a steady state of number of firings.
So you're probably 8 times a year. So you're firing every 6 to 8 weeks, something like that, and over the whole year.
Yeah,
and
we
so,
take the summers off, but
okay. And so this collective of artists will come in, bring what they want fired, and then you will all man it for 5 days to keep it going, and to end up with a product.
Yep, and it's a really fun process. It's a fun. We have a fun time. Like you're standing around your big bonfire, basically, or you're throwing wood into a 2,400 degree inferno, and you have a great time. People are playing music. There's great food. So we have a really fun time for socializing, because you spend 1 minute working every 10 minutes while you throw wood in the kiln. Then you have 9 minutes where you're sitting with your firing partner and you're talking, you're playing games, you're playing music, and so we have basically a great time over 2 days or 5 days, and then we come back 2 weeks later and get like 500 pieces of amazing artwork out of the process. So it's a ridiculously fun thing to do and to keep doing.
I understand one of the more fun projects. I understand that you have a pizza kiln.
Yeah, we actually have 2 wood fire pizza ovens, and so we actually use those.
They had to be wood fired, of course.
Yeah. We burn a lot of wood here. We use the ovens are great because they're a great way to feed the crew. So we make our own pizzas and bread and whatnot, and use our scrap wood.
So Jesse, it's been great visiting with you, but before we leave, I'd like you to share with us any information you would like to share, your website and such.
Okay. My website is www.pleasanthillpottery.com. I'm also on Instagram at Pleasant Hill Pottery and on Facebook at Pleasant Hill Pottery. We have 2 sales a year here at the house. The next sale is May 5th and 6th. Coming up here.
How might one get on your mailing list for that?
It's on our website, and if you email me, or email pleasanthillpottery1@gmail.com, then I can add you to the mailing list.
Great.
You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and you'll have notification there. So we have the sale May 5th and 6th, and then our other sale is early December. And then
Just in time for Christmas.
Just in time for Christmas.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming today. I wish we had more time to spend, and maybe we will in the future. It's been such a pleasure.
Yep, likewise.
Yeah.
Thank you.